Greetings to our viewers and listeners around the world. This is Endgame Episode 4. I'm your host, Christopher Halali. And today, I'm going to introduce a man who needs no introduction. The one, the only, George Galloway. George Galloway was a member of parliament, elected 7 times over 5 decades for 3 different parties. The Labour Party, the Respect Party, and now the Workers' Party of Britain, of which he is the leader. He was also elected as an independent. George Galloway is one of the most prominent voices and a man that I've followed for decades. In fact, in high school, I wrote a letter to him. And so since that point, we've had a connection. I've really admire all of his work. I love everything that he stands for, and we continue to collaborate. Now, I will always be his student. There's no doubt about it. But I'm so happy to call him a friend. He's basically family at this point, and I'm happy to welcome George Galloway to the show. George,
it's
welcome.
An honor, and thank you for that very kind introduction, Dr. Christopher. The feeling is entirely mutual. Since your high school days, you've become a PhD, an intellect of the first rank, but the philosophers only interpret the world. The point is to change it, and you've done a lot of changing it. And so this mixture of high intellect and super activity is what draws me to you, and I'm very glad that I replied to your high school letter. It would have been very embarrassing now if I hadn't.
And I thank you so much for that. But you, by far, are one of the most important voices in the world today. As I'm sure our viewers and listeners know who follow you, you are one of the most prominent voices for peace, for justice, against imperialism, against colonialism, against racism, even though others will like to denigrate you. Those who truly know the facts understand that you have been on the right side of history at every point. And the historical record will, of course, absolve you. As our dear late leader, Fidel Castro, once said, that history will absolve us all. So I wanna ask you generally how you're doing, how things are going these days for you, and to get into all the things that have transpired in recent months regarding you personally.
Well, I am in what you could most accurately describe as self-imposed exile, although the extent to which it's self-imposed is a little unclear, because late last year, returning from Nizhny Novgorod and the World Youth Festival, I was literally held at gunpoint under the Terrorism Act by the anti-terror police at a London airport. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw them advancing towards me. I said, "Are you sure you want to do this, lads? This is a very big step." They said, "Well, we've been asked to do it," but they wouldn't say who asked them. But who asked them was the miserable little twerp, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and the proximate reason was the extraordinary success of our twice-weekly broadcast, The Mother of All Talk Shows. When I began The Mother of All Talk Shows, it had 80,000 listeners, because it was on radio, per week. And now it has in excess of 11 million viewers per week. So that's an exponential growth that no one else can match. And it makes us the most viewed broadcast in the entirety of the United Kingdom, and actually in many other countries too. So he can't stand our show because it is the antidote to the failing prescriptions that he has written for the British people, both in terms of our economy, our society, and of course, not least, our foreign policy disasters, supporting genocide in Gaza, supporting Donald Trump's bombardment of little schoolgirls in Iran at their desks, blowing them to pieces, then double tapping and blowing their teachers and their rescuers into pieces. Keir Starmer is a part and parcel of all of that. These bombers took off from British airfields, laughably described as Royal Air Force bases, although the King is not much saluted there. Although nowadays, I've got to tell you, the King's not much saluted anywhere. But the opposition that we have mustered to Starmer's foreign policy in particular is a mortal threat to him. It has contributed massively to the gigantic hemorrhage in support for him and his misnamed Labour Party. We have played a significant role in his political destruction, which will be complete in just a few days' time, I confidently predict to you. So this was a revenge attack. It was intended to drive me out of the country, and in that it has succeeded. But this is 2026, not 1926. And I can speak to my compatriots more clearly and just as cogently from abroad as I was able to do at home. The difference is he cannot pull the plug on me when I am way beyond his jurisdiction. He literally can't pull the plug, as he would physically have done, and he can't silence me in the way that he definitely was intending to. So we spend our time now between Russia, I'm currently in Moscow, I'm leaving at the weekend, China, Indonesia, where my wife is from, Malaysia, where I have many friends in the government. We are moving around using different studios and different accommodation. It's tough. It's tough living out of a suitcase, as we did for many months. But now we are all together again. I have 4 of my 6 children with me, and soon 5 of my 6 children here with me. And the 6th is herself a mother of 5, so I can hardly ask her to join me. But we are together. We are in good heart. And we are determined. I can't say it didn't affect me, what happened to us. You know, a total of 9 hours at gunpoint by anti-terrorism police when you're, in my case, 70 years of age. You've been elected to Parliament 7 times. You're one of the best known people in the country. You're the leader of a British political party with hundreds of thousands of votes. And suddenly you're detained at an airport in full view of everyone. I can't say it didn't affect me, but it certainly hasn't deterred me. And as long as God gives me breath, I'll keep speaking against Starmer and his ilk.
I think that one thing that has also, had a big impact on me and on many who are concerned about you is that this has had an impact on your health. And you had mentioned it openly and publicly about that. Tell us about how this has affected you on a personal level. Of course, we know the political weaponization of the criminal justice system against you, against a voice that doesn't acquiesce and doesn't kowtow to London, to Washington, to Tel Aviv. But tell us about how this has impacted you on a personal and physical level.
Well, I can say that Russia is in my heart now forever, in the form of a metal titanium pacemaker, which had to be inserted at some pain in just under my collarbone. And I need that pacemaker because this event, shocking and unexpected as it was, created an arrhythmia in my heart and reduced my heartbeat to about 50 beats per minute, which is dangerously low. And I know it was this event because I had a medical not long before this event for insurance purposes, which included an ECG, and there was no trace of an arrhythmia. So the only thing that could have caused this arrhythmia was the shock factor of a man of my age dare I say it, a man of my status, 7 times elected to the British Parliament, 3 times against the odds, running outside of the mainstream party system, one of the best known people in the country, the leader of a British political party, and suddenly men with guns are advancing upon me. And then I'm locked in a room with them and told I'm not under arrest, but I'm not free to leave, and that any refusal to answer their questions will be itself a breach of the Terrorism Act. And the police officer insouciantly said, try getting on an aeroplane with a conviction like that. So here was I, and I was old enough to be their fathers. Here was I being threatened by armed men in a tiny room at Gatwick Airport. So it's scarcely surprising that it had an impact, and the impact was this arrhythmia, which is now corrected by the grace of God and a wonderful Dagestani surgeon under the tutelage of academician Yuri, a great Jewish Georgian surgeon and doctor, academician. I got the very best of treatment, and I'll be forever grateful to them. So I literally now carry a piece of Russia in my heart, made of titanium.
It's amazing that you are in the place where you can have that kind of care and support. And it's not even your native country. Your native country that you've given everything to has treated you in this way. Tell us about your journey for our listeners and viewers who don't know you, and most people know you. There's no way that people don't know who George Galloway is. But to those who don't know you, tell briefly about your journey into political life and sort of your background before we get to the pressing issues of the day.
Well, I was born into political life. I always knew I'd spend a political life. My father was a Scottish trade unionist and Labour Party figure. My mother was an Irish Republican, and her father was an Irish Republican communist. So you can see where I got my anti-imperialism from. And our dinner table, I say dinner table, we didn't actually have a dinner table, but where we sat with our plates on our laps was always a political gathering. So it was absorbed with mother's milk, and I knew from the very earliest days where I stood on all of the issues. And that was long before the internet, when you had to really work to understand issues in far-flung corners of the world. But I did work at that. We were a working-class family on the poorer end of the scale. I left school myself at 16. I never went to university. I went straight into the University of Life on the factory floor. I worked at Michelin, making ZX radial tyres. I used to joke in Parliament that I was the only person in the Parliament that could make a ZX radial tyre. Most of them couldn't even change one if it burst by the side of the road. So I have proletarian, self-educated character, and that has stood me in good stead, I must say, though I don't recommend it to my own children. I want my children to go to university. I'm a great admirer, for example, of your PhD and your learned progress and your extremely varied and interesting life. I want that for my own children, but it worked out well for me to be at a time, this is now in the 1970s, though I began in the 1960s, I was at my first demonstration and knocked over by a police horse at Grosvenor Square in 1968 against the war on Vietnam. So that was, I was 14 at that point. I travelled overnight on a bus from my home city of Dundee to London, and suddenly police horses were charging at us. But I started the 1970s unknown, and I ended the 1970s as quite a prominent political figure for a variety of reasons, not least the revolutionary nature of the 1970s, a decade which is regularly defamed, but which was in fact a quite magnificent decade. And I did an audiobook on it called Street Fighting Man, for that was what I was in those days, and not always in a good way. So by the end of the 1970s, I was the chairman of the entire Labour Party in Scotland, which at that time was a mass party with millions of votes and in control of all organs of power in the state. And I was their 26-year-old chairman, much to the chagrin of the establishment types who tried very hard to stop me. So I went through a period of being the first ever everything, the youngest ever everything, but that has passed. Now I'll soon be the oldest ever everything. I was first elected to Parliament in the 1980s and last elected to Parliament just a year and a half ago. And I think I made my mark there.
There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. In terms of struggles, you have been very, very prominent in the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, where you were involved on the ground. You were involved in the anti-war campaign and in supporting and defending many of the countries in the Middle East, in North Africa, and abroad. You've had a close relationship with Fidel Castro, and you traveled to Cuba. You wrote a book about it, which I hope that everybody can check out. And you were very prominent for also this double-decker bus trip that you took to Baghdad. I think it was London to Baghdad was the trip, and basically trying to break the blockade that had been imposed, the sanctions regime that had been imposed on Iraq, and trying to bring about not only a real sense of solidarity and this kind of diplomatic and political breakthrough, but also solidarity in the form of humanitarian aid and goods. Tell us about those pivotal years. We're talking the 80s and the 90s, and we'll get into the 2000s, which I think are very connected to today.
Well, I should say, first of all, I've had a lifelong love affair with Red London buses. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. And the traditional Routemaster Red London bus is a thing of exceptional beauty for me. And so I've always used these Red London buses in all of my campaigns. But the one that went from Big Ben to Baghdad across, I think, 44 days, traveling across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and entering Baghdad to a welcome from 6 million people running in the streets. I said at the time, it's worth mentioning again, this was the biggest welcome for British people ever, anywhere in the entire history of my country. If you can come up with a bigger welcome, I'd like to hear about it. 6 million people on both sides of the river were out on the streets running ecstatically because Arab satellite television had literally just begun months before. And the great thing about a campaign involving a bus is it's a moving story. So the television has something different to film every single day and broadcast every single day, which they did to their credit. Al Jazeera was the station, the channel in question. You won't find me on Al Jazeera these days, but they did a good job in those days. And the bus was paid for, and the entire journey was paid for by His Highness Sheikh Zayed, the then ruler of the United Arab Emirates. And he regularly required reports of how the journey was going, how we were being received in the Arab countries, and so on. So that's another thing that's changed. I'm never on Al Jazeera now, and I wouldn't be welcome in the United Arab Emirates, now ruled by his son. But the impact of these buses and these convoys was repeated many times in my siege-breaking convoys into Gaza, sometimes taking exactly the same route, sometimes involving buses and ambulances and trucks and boats and all kinds of things. Over and over again, I broke the siege on Gaza. And that was some pretty hard traveling too. So I'm a fan of the moving demonstration, of the moving pageant of resistance. And I commend it to others. I'm a bit too old now to go on these journeys myself, but I'm often asked to endorse them, and I happily do. But you're right, Vietnam was my first cause. My second cause was Palestine, and I've been in that cause now for in excess of 50 years. I first visited Lebanon and the Palestinian Revolution in 1977. I ended up staying. I became very close to the late and great President Arafat, and he ordered me to go home, actually, because he correctly identified that I could do more for the cause in Britain than I could in Beirut. But just in case, he said, if I find that you're still around these streets, I'll shoot you. I don't think he meant it, at least I hope he didn't mean it. But I did go back, and I took my place in British politics. But in the 1980s, I was virtually the only person of my politics, socialist, to go underground in apartheid South Africa. This was because of my closeness to the African National Congress, then led by Nelson Mandela, then held in Pollsmoor Prison, later in Pollsmoor Hospital, previously held on Robben Island. Oliver Tambo was the president of the ANC at that time, based in Lusaka. I was a frequent visitor, not just to Lusaka, the Zambia capital, but all the frontline states. I was deeply involved in Angola, in Mozambique, with my Cuban connection. The Cubans left thousands of their men's bones in the dry earth of southern Africa. No one should ever forget that. And I traveled the length and breadth of apartheid South Africa under the apartheid regime, eventually being caught in Guguletu township and beaten quite seriously by an apartheid police officer who drew quite a bit of blood from my nose. Who knew there was so much blood in one's humble nose? But he beat me quite mercilessly. And then I had to quickly leave South Africa. But in my time there, I became a soldier, an underground soldier without weapons in the struggle against apartheid. And I'm very proud of that. In fact, I'm returning to South Africa, God willing, in September for a 3-week speaking tour, revisiting the scenes of my former inglories, including the Guguletu police station, which I'm glad to say is in different hands these days.
Amazing. What a journey. And it's not as my journey is definitely not as eventful, but certainly I hope that we all can live up to such a life of resistance, such a life dedicated to the people, to serving the people, and especially the oppressed. One thing that we have, of course, in common is a similar background in terms of a family of resistance. My family from Greece and Iran, participating in that resistance. As you know, high school kids have their heroes. They have their sports stars or the famous singers that they like, maybe the boy bands or the cute girls. And my hero was you. So,
oh, wow.
so that was so important,
Thank
especially.
You so much.
No, it's my pleasure. I still have a binder. I actually told my ex-wife, please save that binder, because when it comes, hopefully later this year, to where I am in Moscow. I want you to see it and flip through all of my reports that I made about you when I was in high school, because you were one of the sole voices at the time when I was a young activist getting involved in the anti-war movement, especially the war in Iraq. You were such a prominent voice. And then 2006 in Lebanon. And this is the connection to today. Imagine in 2006 in Lebanon, you are speaking on Sky News, you are hitting the mainstream media, and now look at where we are in 2026, literally 20 years later. And we are once again with an Israeli invasion south of Litani, trying to take territory, bombing relentlessly the Lebanese capital, their tanks now facing FPV drones. What do you make of these years and what is happening right now on the ground in Lebanon, the resistance, and what this Zionist regime is up to in the Middle East? Not only in Lebanon, but also this war of aggression against Iran, not once but twice within a year, bombing Iraq, bombing Yemen, and of course the genocide in Gaza, and what's going on in the West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem, which have been catastrophic in terms of human rights.
Well, of course, it goes back even further than that, because I was literally in Beirut when Israel invaded in 1982. And Hezbollah did not exist in 1982. Hamas did not exist in 1982. But the PLO, with Arafat's faction, Fatah, put up an enormous fight against the invading Israeli stormtroopers. It was called Operation Grapes of Wrath. And I remember very well the fight that they put up around the Crusader Castle, Beaufort Castle. And lo and behold, the Lebanese resistance today, now led by Hezbollah, is putting up a fight around the same Crusader fortress. And the Israeli occupation of Lebanon lasted from that day when I was present in Hamra Street, when they actually were on the outskirts of Beirut, until 2000. So that's 18 years they occupied the south of Lebanon, and they were eventually driven out by the heroic resistance of Lebanese people, who, by the way, included Armenians, they included Sunni Muslims, Christian Muslims, of course, as predominantly Shiite Muslims and members of the main resistance faction, Hezbollah. I always insist on explaining that because our enemies want us to think in sectarian terms. They want us to think in the same exclusivist terms that they themselves think in. And so I can confidently tell you that whatever maneuvers Donald Trump is involved in with unrepresentative presidents and prime ministers, so-called, in Lebanon, the resistance will continue to resist, and the occupation will not last 18 years. I'd be surprised if it lasted 18 months, because the resistance is much stronger now than it was, and the enemy is much weaker now than it was. Weaker in terms of its depleted armories, weaker in terms of the psychological strength of its armed forces, mass desertion, mass flight to Greece, sorry to say, Doctor, to Cyprus, to other European and North American places where they have passports for. Israel is weaker than it has ever been in my 50 years in this particular cause. So I'd like to explain what I mean by so-called prime minister and so-called president, and I hope this doesn't cause you any difficulty. If Hassan Nasrallah, the leader, founder of Hezbollah, had wanted to be the president of Lebanon, he could have been one in the afternoon. because the majority of people in Lebanon would have voted for him. But he did not want to be the president of Lebanon. He respected the multi-religious, multi-confessional nature of the Lebanese state, which is, of course, a bequest from the Sykes and Picot carve-up of the region, British and French carve-up. But he respected that. But the person who occupies the chair as president of Lebanon must be a Christian, even though the Christians are a small part of Lebanese society. You can't be the president unless you're a Christian. You can't be the prime minister unless you're a Sunni Muslim. And they are the smallest population of them all in Lebanon. But you get to be prime minister. So when you say you've reached a deal, as Trump did today, with the president and prime minister, please know that that deal is with the leaders, so-called, of the two smaller sections of the Lebanese population. The largest section of the Lebanese population is with the resistance. And if the resistance did not respect the constitution of Lebanon, they could take over the state in an afternoon, as I said. They are by far and away the most powerful and the most experienced of all men under arms in the country. And it's because they don't want to do that that they have not done that. But if this unrepresentative president and unrepresentative prime minister try to take the weapons out of the hands of the Lebanese resistance, then there will be very grave consequences indeed for the future of Lebanon.
I agree with you. And one thing that's noteworthy is that even through all of these recent years of relentless bombardment, of invasion, of the attacks that have taken place, like the illegal criminal pager attack that the Israelis carried out, in all of these instances, of course, all of the talking heads, military analysts, and sort of public intellectuals in the West have said the resistance is dead, Hezbollah is defeated, that's it. What these past few weeks have shown us is that that's far from the truth. In fact, they are much more capable than we had expected. They are much more advanced technologically on the ground. They're using drone technology that we see in the special military operation. And they're using them against Merkava tanks. They're sending body bags home to Israel. And we're seeing the weeping and wailing of those family members who didn't believe that there was a Lebanese resistance still. Now, that resistance is connected to the much bigger resistance overall in the region that has been subjected to two wars of aggression. And I'm speaking about Iran. We saw in late February, once again, just like last summer, we saw negotiations between the United States and Iran taking place. And in the midst of those negotiations, the absolute illegal, unprovoked attacks against a UN member state for no reason at all. These were so-called preemptive strikes, what we heard in the Bush administration against Iraq, that somehow they were having the capability, so therefore we have to strike. What do you see over the past weeks? You've traveled to Iran many times. You were in Iran last year, actually, for the Soap Festival. What do you see on the ground in Iran, and what do you see now of the resistance of Iran, which many thought once they killed the supreme leader, Iran's government's going to collapse, and in fact, the opposite has happened. How do you assess that?
Well, as George W. Bush might put it, they underestimated the Islamic Republic of Iran. That is very obvious indeed. What was intended to be a 2, 3, 4-day war became a 40-day war, and Iran is more than willing and more than able to continue that war for years, if necessary. I wrote what turned out to be rather a prescient article more than 40 years ago, describing what would become a crescent of crisis. And that crescent was from the Islamic Republic of Iran, which had only recently overthrown the tyrant so-called Shah of Persia, and which had an echo mainly in the Shiite populations of the rest of that crescent, which stretched all the way to Lebanon. Quite prescient because, as I said earlier, Hezbollah didn't even exist then. I knew this would be a crisis for imperialism because I knew that the fighting spirit of the Shiite Muslims in particular had been awoken by the Iranian Revolution, and I believed, and correctly as it's turned out, that the Iranian Revolution would be the only genuine and lasting anti-imperialist force in the region. And there have been other competitors, which I favoured personally more. The Syrian and the Iraqi Ba'ath parties, the Nasserite followers in most Arab countries, and others. But they turned out not to be consistent anti-imperialists. They played ball with imperialism when it suited them, and they opposed it oftentimes merely rhetorically. But the Iranians have, for 47 years, been ironclad in their resistance and in their determination to build an axis of resistance throughout that crescent that I talked about 4 decades ago. And they didn't let us down. In fact, never mind the Americans misunderestimating the Iranians, I misunderestimated them. I knew that they would fight to the last man if necessary, but I did not know, how could I, that their ballistic and hypersonic and drone technology had reached the zenith that it subsequently was shown to have reached. And they fought to a standstill 2 nuclear-armed superpowers, one regional, the so-called Israel, and one global, the global superpower, the United States. Now, this is the equivalent of the Vietnamese people's victory over American imperialism in the 1970s. And it has ended the presence. I mean, if you look at a list of American bases in the Persian Gulf 41 days ago or 45 days ago, and look at the map today of American bases in the Persian Gulf, you'll notice a very significant change because Iran has forced them to scuttle those bases, letting down the countries that they promised to defend with those bases, and to hide their soldiers in hotels and God knows where else. The United States in Vietnam clattered off the roof of the embassy in what was then called Saigon, and here they raced for their helicopters on the ground and only just escaped in time. So the Iranian military prowess, as well as the political character that they have shown for 47 years, is sufficient to say that Iran has now emerged as a 4th superpower. I had Dr. Chris Hedges on my show last night, Pulitzer Prize winner, former Middle East bureau chief of the New York Times. I put this point to him and he agreed. There's 4 superpowers are now America, Russia, China, and Iran. That's quite an achievement, isn't it?
Oh, no doubt about it. And I was able to watch that episode. For those who haven't seen it, please go check Moats and check out that episode with Dr. Chris Hedges, which was absolutely fantastic. And I agree with you. I agree that Iran has emerged as a superpower. Not 1, but 2 nuclear states at a standstill. I mean, that is unbelievable. With a non-nuclear state, Iran is not a nuclear state in the sense that it does not possess nuclear weapons, contrary to what the rabid Zionists say in the West, that they are days away, weeks away, months away, who knows? They're going to get it in a second. But it's clear that they don't need to have nuclear weapons. And we heard that from the former leader of the Russian Federation, Medvedev, who said that Iran does possess a nuclear weapon. It's the Strait of Hormuz. And they were able to show, with closing the Strait of Hormuz, how powerful Iran is and how much it can choke the U.S. economy and the global economy and let in its friends and let out its friends and deny anyone else passage of that. So this is a really historic moment, I believe. It's a sort of Suez moment, like we saw before, but very much akin to a transformational moment in this developing multipolar world that we speak about. Another area that is hot right now, that I think concerns both yourself and myself, both of us having spent time there, is Cuba. What do you make of what's going on with Cuba, this hybrid war against Cuba, and what the U.S. could be attempting to do with a possible invasion of the island?
Well, if they do invade the island, they'll face millions of armed people who will fight them as they fought them at the Bay of Pigs to disastrous debacle. There are more than 1 million members of the Cuban Communist Party alone under arms, and there are millions of others who are armed and ready to defend the sovereignty which they have so clung to in the teeth of all adversity for all this time. Since 1959, the United States has been trying to destroy the Cuban Revolution. My friend, the late and great Fidel Castro, was the subject of literally hundreds of assassination attempts. Everything from disease-ridden rubber diving suits to blocking the snorkel on his mouthpiece for when he went deep-sea diving, which he liked to do in the middle of the night. I had the honor to accompany him on one of those, to honey traps and poisoned food and all kinds of other things. So the Cubans have withstood everything. It's true it was a different world back then, but Cuba has friends all over the world, and many of them are very powerful friends. We're both sitting in one of them right now. I don't believe that the Russian Federation would allow Cuba to fall. I don't believe the People's Republic of China would allow Cuba to fall. I don't believe Iran would allow Cuba to fall. And I definitely don't believe the Cuban people would allow Cuba to fall, because they know very well that Cuba, before the triumph of the revolution, was merely a bordello for American gangster capitalism, a casino, a bordello, a place where these gangster capitalists went to satiate their vile tastes before Epstein was ever heard of. And they know the degradation that American control of Cuba represented for the island. So I believe that Cuba will survive this crisis. It has survived comparable, perhaps even worse crises. I was frequently in Cuba during what they called the special period, immediately after the fall of the Soviet Union, when Cuba lost all of its oil, and Cuba lost the vast majority, some 80% of its trade. And that special period was surmounted. Necessity became the mother of invention. And I always put it this way, according to the laws of aerodynamics, the bumblebee cannot fly. Its body is too heavy, its wings too slight, but the bumblebee does fly, and a beautiful sight it is too. According to the normal laws of economics and politics, Cuba should have collapsed in the 1990s, but it did not. And it still flies resplendent today, and forevermore it shall.
Yes, I think that all of us fully understand, those of us who've been to the island, the heroism of the Cuban people, their tenacity, their resilience under extreme situations, including this illegal blockade, which they call a genocidal blockade. That's what it is, that has been imposed on Cuba for decades, well over half a century. So the Cuban people will resist. What do you make of what's happening back in the UK? You yourself are the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. There is a big movement now in Britain for, first of all, there was the big movement to exit the European Union, the Brexit movement. There's been a big movement to try to reassert some level of national sovereignty, some level of independence. How is the Workers' Party of Britain carrying out its political tasks? How does it look to stand in the upcoming elections?
I think we're going to do very well in those elections. I think everyone's going to do very well at the expense of the most unpopular government in the entire history of the country. That's not hyperbole, that's cephalological fact, charted by the best cephalological brains. There has never been a more hated Prime Minister than Keir Starmer, and there have been some pretty hated ones, Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, and so on, but nothing like this block of wood that you're showing on the screen now. There has never been a more unpopular government than this one, again, attested by cephalological fact. So we're all going to feed on the corpse of what is still laughably called the British Labour Party. Now, some of their voters will move left, some will move green, and some will move right to what is essentially a fake British nationalist party, which, just like Donald Trump's fake American nationalist party, turns out to be nothing of the kind. Trump didn't put America first. Nigel Farage would not put Britain first. He would put Israel first. He'd put the United States first. And that much has now been demonstrated by his volte-face on the Ukraine war, on the Gaza war, on the Iran war. He supported the devil in all of these conflicts. And Keir Starmer is now, in defiance of the biggest mandate ever achieved by anybody, which was our victory in the Brexit referendum. More people voted for Brexit than have ever voted for anybody or anything in the entire history of Britain. But Keir Starmer is now well on the way to taking us back into the European Union. Not that we'll notice much difference, because although we Brexited, we became more European than the EU. We became more royal than the king, more Catholic than the Pope. We were, instead of pursuing an independent foreign and economic policy, we have followed since Brexit a craven imperialist policy abroad and neoliberal economics at home. So we've made no use whatsoever of the Brexit victory that we won, and that has left Brexit with fewer friends than it had and fewer friends than it should have. I always insisted that Brexit was a necessary but not sufficient condition for the kind of Britain we needed to be. In other words, we could not have the Britain we want it to be because that's not allowed under EU rules. So we had to get out from under in order to do the things to rebuild our manufacturing base, to prefer British manufacturers, for our national infrastructure and our vital national industries. I mean, Britain's a country without a steel industry. Britain is an island without a shipbuilding industry. Britain is an island surrounded by oil that, in the name of net zero, it has willfully capped the oil wells so that we have to import oil from Norway, even though our own oil is under our own sea. Our country was built on 1,000 years of coal, and we flooded the coal mines in the Thatcher period because we wanted to destroy the coal mining in Britain, on which hundreds of thousands of people in communities across the country depended, not just for wages, but for everything else that makes a community, and which were left as little more than human slag heaps. That was another of my great causes. I'm an honorary member of the National Union of Mine Workers, going back to 1982, and I fought every single day of the 1 year miners' strike in 1984, 1985. And we were defeated by perfidy, by treachery, by the Social Democrats in Parliament and by the Quislings at the top of the trade union movement at the time, and it hasn't changed. So the miners were defeated, which meant the working class was defeated, which meant it lost all confidence in its ability to alter the facts of our daily lives, and we turned to one chimera after another, the EU or other such nonsense. But if you look at the Britain we had before we joined the European Union, and look at the Britain we had when we left it, there's not much of a case for going back into it.
That's for sure. That's for sure. There's no doubt that there have been important transformations following Brexit. And I think that those who are advocating to go back into the EU, I don't think that they're going to have much support from many people in the United Kingdom, especially after that Brexit vote that you said was quite historic, the most historic in terms of numbers in British history. I have about 2 minutes or so left with you. I want to ask you one thing that unites us as people from the United Kingdom and from the United States is not only common law and our similar history, of course, being colonies and then fighting 2 wars, actually, for liberation, but also the crimes of the Epstein class. And we see, of course, that has roped in the royal family, as it has many of the political, academic, financiers, business people in the United States. Let me ask you, what's in store for the Epstein class coming up? We have midterm elections in the United States this year. As you mentioned, there are elections coming up in the UK. What is in store for this Epstein class that we're now calling it? And what do you see in this short amount of time for the future?
Well, as Oscar Wilde said, we are two peoples divided by a common language. But increasingly, we are one country. Our culture is the same, our language is the same, our political class are the same, and our Epstein class are the same. So my view is we might as well roll with it. That's why my show appeals as much to Americans as it does to British viewers. In fact, they're almost identical in terms of proportion of the audience. It's why I'm so close to people like you, because we are facing the same enemy and we have the same remedies if we can persuade our people to take them. So the Epstein class continues to exist. They continue to commit their crimes against children, against women, and against all that is decent and holy. And until my last breath, I will struggle against them. And after me, I have, by the grace of God, 6 children, and you have even more. So we're not going out of business anytime soon, Dr. Christopher Halali.
That much is true. That much is true. I think that one thing that is clear is that there were a lot of lies sold to us from this Epstein class on both sides of the pond, as we say. They talked about sovereignty. They talked about independence. They talked about a new foreign policy, a new dawn. And what we got was more corruption, more deceit, and more wars that we didn't ask for. So this, of course, I think is deeply, deeply troubling. Finally, just the last moment, tell us what people should look forward to about your work. I think that everybody who doesn't follow the Mother of All Talk shows should follow it, subscribe to it, should get involved, should be a part of your show. You actually allow people to call in. Tell us about what your work, what's coming up now, not only in Moats, but also as leader of the Workers' Party of Britain.
Well, follow me on social media. I have many millions of followers, and my best work at the moment, but these tech giants can change that at a moment's notice, or lack of notice, is on Facebook. I have, last month, I had 101 million views on Facebook. I'm less censored on Facebook than I am on X, although I still have big numbers on X. So on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, on X, please follow me. Watch the Mother of All Talk shows, where you'll get a twice weekly roundup of the problems that exist in the world, but also the solutions. And I hope you and I can appear on screen together more often in the future. I'd like to talk to you about that. Thank you, Christopher, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, George, for joining us. Stay with us for just a few moments after the closing. And I want to thank you again for all of your hard work, all of the work that you've done over the years, and all the work that you will continue to do. Because with that new piece of Russia near your heart, I guarantee you'll be here a lot longer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. That was the one and only, the great former Member of Parliament, George Galloway. Make sure to follow Moats and make sure to follow the work of the Workers' Party of Britain. For Endgame, this is Christopher Halali signing off.